has the fact that you've built a community helped you stand out in any way from everything else that's going on?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Like having that community has been sort of like an anchor, no matter what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
New breweries, craft cocktails just sort of took over, especially post pandemic, all over. Like every bar now has a fancy cocktail program with clarified cocktails and chopping their own ice. And it just came out of nowhere and it's just sort of
Yeah,
everywhere. But yeah, having that community
yeah,
definitely has been like an anchor where, that community still likes craft beer. They still show up. They still drink beer. Even though there is a lot of commonality between the craft beer community and the cocktail community, but they have not necessarily gone off beer.
Hi, and welcome to Big Food Energy, a podcast that spotlights some of the most exciting food businesses in India and around the world. Today, we're chatting with Nakul Bhonsle, the founder and director at Great State Aleworks, one of the finest craft breweries in India. While the craft beer industry in India has gone through its fair share of ups and downs, Great State has remained steady since its launch in 2017. Over the years, they've made a name for themselves with an extremely innovative set of tasty beers that include local and indigenous ingredients, from rhubarb to jawar and even kokum. But what has fascinated me the most about what Great State has been able to do is how they've built a community of not just beer lovers, but also people who are passionate about books, music, art, design, and food. And so we're getting into just that with Nakul. I should add that I've known Nakul for a long, long time, long before he was a beer baron, and when we were in college bunking class to go drink beer. So I know that beer has been always a very exciting thing for Nakul for a long time. Hi, Nakul. Welcome to Big Food Energy.
Thanks, Smitha. I think beer baron is an overstatement as of right now, but maybe someday.
Craft beer baron.
Sure, I'll take it.
Why not? Super. So, Nakul, for everyone who's listening and who's not familiar with Great State, could you start by telling us how you arrived at the idea of starting a brewery? What was the scene like? I know that it was quite a shift from what you were doing earlier. So, if you could start just with that.
Yeah, I mean, quick, you know, gist of how beer happened was that I
Mm-hmm.
used to be very interested in the renewable energy space before I went for my master's to the US. I thought I would be a energy finance executive of some sort. That was the goal, and I always wanted to come
So
back to
much
start
for
my
that.
own business. Uh, and then one thing led to the other. I couldn't do renewable energy. I ended up as a natural gas trading analyst, which was a very boring job. And as I was doing that boring job, is when I got introduced to home brewing when I was in the US. And after a few beers that I brewed at home, I said, hey, I could do this for a living. And this could be the business that I can start in India. And, a few years of R&D and visiting breweries and drinking lots of beer, it made complete sense to do it. And I saw myself doing this for a long time. And then, yeah, I just took the plunge at some point in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So, in 2014, you started brewing beer at home, and then 2017 was when you actually set up Great State.
Yes,
So, what all
yes.
happened within that timeline?
So I brewed my first beer. It was a Belgian pale ale, which was supremely delicious. And I was like, wow, first of all, this is quite easy to do. And I have always enjoyed beer, drinking beer. I was up until very recently a very proud beer only person. I would not drink any cocktails, any spirits whatsoever. That's changed now. But so beer made sense. And after I started home brewing, I started being part of home brewing clubs in New York, visiting breweries, starting to understand the craft beer culture, which is very unique to this space. It felt like a really nice space to be in. A very, though it's a business, but it's very passion driven for all the craft brewers in the US and very collaborative in nature, where they're not necessarily competing with each other. So I like that scene a lot. So it felt like a nice industry to be in the long run. And yeah, visited a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
breweries in the US on the East Coast, West Coast, met a lot of brewers. At that point, Maharashtra already had a craft brewing license, but it was for brew pubs only. So you had to have you could serve beer where you brew it in a restaurant or a bar. But in 2014 is when Maharashtra allowed a distribution policy. post which breweries could make beer in their brewery and start supplying to bars and restaurants. So that was a game changer for me because I didn't want to necessarily
Right.
um, uh, open a restaurant and then a bar and get into that. So
Mm-hmm.
when I learned that this new rule has come in, it made sense to go for it. And then during my breaks visits to India, I started visiting breweries, started meeting restaurant owners in 2015, 16. Yeah, and then at some point I was ready. I thought, okay, I can do this. And then I came back and started it. It took good 2 years to actually set up the business, because of
Mm-hmm.
licensing and a whole bunch of other issues that come up for any entrepreneur. And yeah, finally then started selling beer officially in November of 2017.
Awesome. Okay.
Hmm.
And this was from your brewery in Pune,
Yes. So we set
essentially,
up,
that you were
yes.
supplying to different bars and restaurants
Right,
across
right.
Bombay.
So unlike
And
unlike the brewing scene in say Bangalore where it's all massive brew pubs, 200-seater, ours is a
mm-hmm.
small factory in the heart of Pune in a small industrial area, which we set up, typical to the craft breweries of the US, which I was exposed to, which are very bootstrapped.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is, it's in the US, the craft beer culture is driven by home brewers. Home brewing was legalized in the 60s. Bunch of people started home brewing because of lack of good beer, and they started opening breweries. So these were not, finance whizzes or MBAs who were setting up breweries. They were people who moved from their kitchen to their
Yeah.
garage to a small factory. So it was very bootstrapped in nature, and of course, wine industry had taken off already. So the equipment
Mm-hmm.
for brewing beer is sort of similar to wine. So it was easy to get good manufacturers to make the entire equipment for us, and we ended up self-designing it ourselves, and yeah, meeting a lot of brewers who helped us with the design of our brewery. So that was a very unique phase of my brewery uh, experience, because I had to learn a lot of engineering aspects, a lot of supply chain
Mm-hmm.
issues, things which I didn't know of before.
Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. Um, so, of the many things that the Great State community stands for, I know that being local and indie is a big pillar.
Yeah.
So, can you talk to me about how that's reflected in what you do with your beer and how you engage with the farming community?
So, one thing was very clear to me when I came back to India to start the brewery, that I want to feature unique local ingredients. Kokum was on the top of my list
Mm-hmm.
back then because I loved it as a fruit and I wanted to do something with it. And luckily, I was exposed to craft beer in the US, which is different from some other parts of the
Mm-hmm.
world where a lot of experimenting was happening. So, um, promoting local Indian ingredients was fit right. It fit right in our DNA as a brewery, and it also gave us some pride in creating
Mm-hmm.
first of a kind beers, which have literally never been brewed ever before anywhere else in the world. Um, so started with say an ingredient like kokum because of the community, let's say chef community.
Mm-hmm.
A close friend of mine who's a farmer in Uti says, "Hey, try this thing. It's called rhubarb. I had never tried it before." So we tried rhubarb, and it made a lot of sense to use it in a beer. Um, there's so many things. We use jackfruit in a beer because we did 2 years ago we did a social media
Wow.
post saying, "Hey, would you like to brew a beer with us? Suggest an ingredient." And then
Mm-hmm.
a customer from Bombay says
Someone suggested jackfruit.
jackfruit. Yeah.
Wow.
So we brewed a jackfruit beer. So these are exciting things for us to do,
Mm-hmm.
and it fits with what we wanted to do. It fits with our marketing strategy because it gives us new and exciting things to put out in the market, so that there is a excuse to invite someone again to say try something new, and then people do step out for these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One very key ingredient which we started using from the early days was millet. We got introduced.
Sorry to interrupt you, but if you could explain, like, how does that process happen of brewing a millet beer? Like, do you swap out an ingredient when you're
Yes, yeah.
of a regular beer recipe when you're making? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so beer is essentially four ingredients. Grain, usually
Mm-hmm.
barley, wheat, hops, yeast, water. Grain makes up the most in terms of quantity. So what we are doing with our millet beers is we are swapping out malted barley, which is usually imported for craft breweries,
Mm-hmm.
with locally grown unmalted
Mm-hmm.
grain. So it's not an
Right.
easy replacement. There was a lot of R&D that we had to do to be able to do that. So essentially, that's what we started doing. And then at one point we realized, okay, let's ask ourselves why we are doing this. What do we want to achieve from this? And that
Mm-hmm.
led to learning a lot about millets as a grain. They're they grow very well on the soil in India. They need very little water. They're very hardy crops. Farmers today are growing, a small percentage of their farm is dedicated to millets for personal consumption because they know it's good for health. Millets are also gluten free,
Right.
but they're not growing it because there is no demand for it. So we said, okay, can we as a
Mm-hmm.
business do a little bit there? Since we know these things about farmer difficulties, and it's sad that the product they can easily grow and they have generation worth of knowledge, they can't grow because they have to grow
Yeah.
water intensive products like sugarcane or horticulture and whatnot.
Right.
And then 70% of what you're paying to a shop is not going to the farmer. So we said, okay, we will go straight to the farmer and pay them the full price so that they're incentivized to grow millet. 100% millet
Mm-hmm.
beers as of December last year. So these are gluten-free beers. These are also
Wow.
one of a kind beers which have hit the
Mm-hmm.
market recently.
Right. And what has like the that impact been on the farming community, since you've been going directly to the farmers to source the millet? If you could talk to me a little bit about that sourcing policy that you mentioned.
Yeah. So, we realized that, okay, we want to source grains direct from farmers. So the next question was, okay, which farmers?
Mm-hmm.
Our internal analysis said that, okay, it makes sense to go to drought hit regions where there is less water so that this message is stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So we chose
Sure.
through partner organizations, we chose our first region, which is in Satara, which is a village which gets less rain compared to rest of Satara. So that became our first region. Second thing was, let's not go once and take pictures and never show our face again. Let's continue to buy from the same region. Then the third thing was,
Mm-hmm.
okay, to make some impact, we need to commit to a certain target. Like, using 200 kilos every
Right.
6 months is it's there's just no impact. So we have committed to 5 tons
Yeah.
of millet that we want to use in this financial year. 2.5 tons from these farmers. So they're very happy, saying, okay, you have basically given me a confirmed order for my October harvest. And they're telling other farmers,
Mm-hmm.
why don't you grow millets? Because we have a buyer. So there's a lot of onus now on us because
We have a bakra.
we need to, yeah, now 5 ton needs to become 10 tons. Uh, but yeah, at
Hmm.
least, at least it's a start. I won't say the impact is huge right now
Yeah.
because it's still a very tiny
Sure.
uh, percentage from what we're doing, but hopefully other breweries do the same. Hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
there are some incentives to shift to millets. So those are the kind of things we want to look at in a short to medium term. Whether can
Right.
we bring some policy change? Can we bring other brewers to come in and brew so that ultimately that impact
Mm-hmm.
grows.
Right. And the
Yeah.
community just grows larger and
Right.
larger. So, Nakul, most craft breweries in India focus primarily on beer, as one would assume is the right thing to do. But like I said, what I find interesting about Great State is that you've consciously worked at building an entire community or a network of people around Great State, from farm to mug, for lack of a better term. That includes farmers who grow the raw material to people who are interested in music and vinyls and reading and science. Um, so how did you sort of zero in on the fact that you wanted to build a community, or is that something that just sort of happened as you grew?
I mean, this again takes me back to my roots, my craft beer roots,
Hmm.
which were craft breweries in the US. I remember from my early days were all the small pop-ups I visited, whether it's 8 people or 20 people, the brewery tours that I visited. I
Hmm.
remember one very interesting event that I attended in New York, which was Dogfish Head, which is a big craft brewery, had a collab beer with Sierra Nevada, which is an even bigger craft brewery, and they had a beer drop. So I went for this event, and the founders of these two breweries were both present. And these are beer legends. Like they've built these two companies over 30 years already in 2013 or 14. And them personally being there interacting with
Wow.
35 people was quite something. And I had just finished reading Dogfish Head Founder's book. And for me to meet him and talk to him about the Indian craft beer scene was super cool. So when I came back, it was just obvious and natural to do more of what I saw there. And as craft
Hmm.
brewers, again going back to being bootstrapped, we didn't have budgets for marketing executives and marketing teams or branding agencies or all those things that a typical business known to need. Yeah, and it was just a small team doing everything from operations to brewing to marketing and all of it together. The only marketing budget
Everything
we really
comes
had
in.
was
Yeah.
our beer. So it made sense to continue what we saw there, have brewery tours, tie up with
Hmm.
chefs, tie up with restaurants to do interesting things to slowly 8 people, 15 people at a time introduce people to craft beer in the right way possible. And
Hmm.
eventually, that definition of what community means started to expand. So from beer drinkers and chefs, it became okay. What about artists? What about designers? What about scientists, for example?
Hmm.
What about books and readers and authors? And yeah,
Hmm.
it sort of evolved to include many more subcultures, and it made sense to do that because ultimately for me it was always about more about working with an individual than a brand. So if that individual is a
Hmm.
coffee roaster or a scientist but is very passionate about what he or she is doing and wants to spread that word and educate the audience, then it made sense to do it even if it doesn't make business sense in the long run.
Right. Right. Okay. And so can you explain like what these things were? Like what did you do with scientists? What did you do with the music community to sort of build out this larger community of beer drinkers?
Yeah, I mean, it started with chefs. So a very good, talented chef, Gayatri, who had just moved back to Pune before she started ground up. I had just
Hmm.
moved back, so we got connected. We started
Gayatri
doing
Desai.
Gayatri Desai. Super talented. She visited, spent a lot of time in Vietnam, Mexico, and was trying to, get her learnings to see
Hmm.
how she can use local ingredients and local techniques. And we started doing pop-ups with her on her rooftop or at farmhouses. We tied up with a travel company called No Thepla, and we started putting these pop-ups together. And they were just friends and family. We were charging money for these pop-ups; they were not free.
Hmm.
And we saw that slowly more and more people started to come. We heard from other people saying, "Hey, how do I get to go for these pop-ups? There is no social media page. There's just nothing I can nowhere I can find what's happening." And that was like a nice
Right.
initial, indicator that this works. Then that led to,
Hmm.
a now good friend Anup, who's a climate scientist in Pune, who I met at a pop-up with Gayatri. One day comes to me saying, "Hey, I've always wanted to start this concept called Science on Tap, where I want to bring a scientist from the scientific community of Pune, so many research institutes, to a bar and talk to people
Hmm.
about their subject over a pint of beer, so that it's very casual and it's not very classroom-like." So I was like, "For sure, let's do it."
Right.
So a part of it was us being
Yeah.
open and saying yes to many things, and building
Hmm.
good relationships with people who we are working with. So it was always a long term association, not a one time thing. That led to talking books.
Right.
That led to, I mean, something else that
What is talking
happened.
books?
Talking books is Nandini Iyer, who's a editor of Open Magazine. She moved to Pune and she said, "Hey, I want to do something similar with uh, books that you do with science." So she invites a
Hmm.
author who has recently published a book in the last, 2 to 4 months, and invites that author to Pune at
Hmm.
our bar, where there's a Q&A between them, there's a Q&A between the audience, and through this, people are drinking craft beer. Yeah. So these things,
Right.
bring in an audience which we don't have access to normally, but they're
Hmm.
very likely to enjoy craft beer. And so,
Right.
typically do a food pop-up, we get the same audience again and again. But how do you get a,
Yeah.
scientist to love craft beer and keep drinking craft beer, keep ordering craft beer, and take his scientist friends or her scientist friends to bars to say, hey, why are you drinking Kingfisher? Try this local beer. So it was a nice
Yeah.
way to expand our community without really spending money. There was no
Mhm.
uh, cost associated with this. The cost was the effort we are putting to
Right.
make all of this happen. During COVID, I started collecting records. This just one of those things. Some people started
Hmm.
baking bread. I started collecting records, and I bought my first record player when I had 15 odd
Just a
records.
hipster thing.
That's what you keep saying, but uh, when I got 15 records, I'm like, why don't we just have a little listening session at our bar? And 30 more people showed up for it.
Hmm.
So that became a new thing, and we kept doing that through from 2020 to now.
Okay, and how that's super cool. And then I think you also did something. Great State is coming out with a vinyl soon.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
tell me about that.
So we again a COVID thing, because bars were shut, and we needed to keep the brand active and alive, and growler deliveries was a
Hmm.
thing. So something new we started was a Great State playlist. We called it Great State of Mind. These were
Okay.
playlists that friends, family, friends of friends started curating for us. We have 50 playlists now on a Spotify page,
Wow.
and it was a great way for me personally to discover new music. And I'm very
Yeah.
particular about what music we play at our bar in Pune, which is our first tap room, which we
Hmm.
opened post COVID. So we just kept curating these cute playlists, and we play this music at the bar. And then we got connected with,
Hmm.
because of the uh, interest in vinyl and all the events that we're doing with vinyl, we got connected to India Record Company. And Nehal, who's the founder, one day says, hey, why don't we press our own record? So we did exactly that. We have 10 Indian artists
Wow.
who we have sort of made contracts with, and they have each given us one song. These songs are pressed on a vinyl. It's called Great State of Mind Volume 1, and currently being pressed in Europe. So maybe in a month they come down. So it's a little bit of like personal interest, which makes sense because
Hmm.
people do like these things, and so just go deeper and deeper within these subcultures, which leads to things like,
Right. Right.
yeah, vinyl being pressed.
Right.
Hmm.
Very cool. So I'm guessing it's like an exploration of different cultures, of people who would have a likelihood of enjoying a craft beer. Um, but I'm guessing what most people would be thinking is, has that really translated into sales for Great State?
Hmm.
And have you been able to monetize this community in some way? So if you could talk to me a little bit about that.
Honestly, there's no clear way to know how we have monetized, or there's no way to
Sure.
quantify this, but there's no doubt that,
Hmm.
you know, people who become part of this community are sort of fans of the brand,
Yeah.
and they do end up drinking beer. Unlike, beer is a very unique product in that sense. Unlike, a diamond ring, you buy that once in your life. You're drinking beer all the time. Mostly you're drinking in social occasions. So, we convert
Hmm.
one person to craft beer. That means, not just that one person spending 800 rupees at a bar, but it's a lifetime value of that customer. because apart from, coming
Yeah.
back to us and drinking our beer, that person is also introducing friends and family to craft beer, is contributing to in so many other ways, that it's not quantifiable, but
Mm-hmm.
definitely a very clear connect. When we opened our first tap room in Pune in 2021, because we had a community already in Pune, we were doing good from day one. We didn't need to go all out with a big
Right.
PR push and like influencer marketing. We opened doors and people started pouring in because we had built that community. Yeah,
Obviously, now Nakul, all of this sounds very cool. You're pressing a vinyl, you're launching a zine, you're working with farmers. This sounds like a lot of work apart from actually brewing beer. So, uh, could you tell me about what were the challenges along the way with a strategy like this? Because it sounds like you're doing many different things
yeah,
that may or may not tie back into your actual bottom line.
right. I mean, like I said, when we sort of came back, and when I came back and I started setting up Great State, like uh, it made sense to do these things and let the word spread organically.
Hmm.
Um, led to a lot of things happening simultaneously. So the one challenge was how to keep everything tied to beer and make sure the ultimate point here is to get people to consume beer, right? And the
Yeah.
subcultures are used to get exposed to a newer audience, but it's always through the lens of beer.
Hmm.
So you might be listening to a vinyl, but it's
Yeah.
music to listen to when drinking beer. You might be, we're doing a lot with farmers, but it's ultimately used in a beer to have a delicious beer. So the challenge is to connect all of it back. The challenge is also,
Hmm.
to say no to certain things which we are not very good at. Something exciting comes up and we are ready to do it. And the challenge is, we are a small
Yeah.
team. We are only so much we can really do. And I think the last challenge,
Yeah.
the final challenge is how do you communicate this to on social
Hmm.
media platforms, which has become the only way to get to your audience, right? So doing a
Get the
lot,
word out.
yeah.
Right.
And the more we do now, that challenge is becoming more apparent of how do we, as a beer
Hmm.
brand, talk about all these things while keeping the central message still, you know, that this is damn good, tasty craft beer. Yeah. So that's a
Yeah.
work in
Yeah.
progress
Absolutely.
challenge.
Okay, so just to shift gears a little bit, you mentioned that you work with a whole bunch of different ingredients apart from millet. You work with kokum, you work with rhubarb. Um, Tell me about your R&D process. How do you what goes into actually making a beer?
Um, so one very smart thing I did when setting up the brewery was I set up a small 200-liter pilot system in the brewery, um,
Hmm.
which gave us the ability to experiment with super small batch beers using unconventional ingredients without really having to worry about what this costs or how this tastes. Right? We have our large batch beers, our New England IPA, our lager, our Belgian wheat, which are brewed on the larger system, which are available at most bars that we are present at, which is about 65 now between Bombay, Pune, Goa. Uh, the small batch beers is where we go crazy with experimenting, and because it's small batch, we need a fairly small target group that appreciates these beers, and that's made it easy
Hmm.
to keep experimenting. We have released little more than 60 beers in the last 6.5 years. Um, so the having that
Wow.
flexibility to do small batches has been one
Hmm.
big thing. Um, Second, beer is so versatile as a product. You know, growing up, we know beer as a lager, but there's so many different styles, and it's so versatile that literally
Right.
any ingredient can be incorporated in the recipe. So you have a kokum, you add that to a wheat
Hmm.
beer, it works very well. You do kokum with a sour, it works exceptionally well. I mean, name an ingredient. Saisons takes fruit very well. So jackfruit saison goes very well. So it's fairly
Mm-hmm.
uncomplicated to come up with recipes for using new ingredients. Um, as long
Mm-hmm.
as the basic knowledge on how to brew beers is good, and then to incorporate different ingredients, it's
Right.
actually quite straightforward once you manage your base brewing. Yeah.
Understood. Has there ever been an experiment that's gone wrong? Like something you tried and you're like, okay, this is really not something that we can put out.
Yeah, there was one. There were a couple actually. There was one which was a chocolate mint stout. Uh, Concept sounded really good, like an after eight in a
Mm-hmm.
strong,
Sounds like an after eight.
yeah.
Yeah.
But the challenge was how do you incorporate chocolate and mint? And
Hmm.
unlike say in the US, there are flavor companies that are giving you organic extracts of various flavors, natural organic extracts. Here we don't
Yeah.
have that. So here we were trying to extract the chocolate ourselves, extract the mint ourselves, and ultimately the beer didn't look great. It didn't have head.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the customer knowing or not knowing. So we that was the standard. We have said that if something is off, we don't sell.
Right.
But luckily,
So you're saying that there are a bunch of off flavored beers in the
for
market
sure, for
that the
sure,
customer wouldn't pick up on, but
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I would
wow.
name breweries or but
Mm-hmm.
when the beer scene sort of exploded, in this 2015 to 2020,
Mm-hmm.
Bangalore now has 80
Yeah.
plus brew pubs in one city, right? Maharashtra combined has 30.
Wow.
Okay, Bangalore as one city has 80 brew pubs. Gurgaon has 40, 50. Just in Gurgaon, there's Sector 27, which has like 25 of them. So, a lot of money started
Wow.
pouring in. Uh, the unique thing about the Maharashtra craft beer scene is it's very homebrewer led. So there's a little bit more focus on
Mm-hmm.
understanding, first of all, and of like some ownership homebrewers have of like putting out a decent product. Can't, it's not the same everywhere. And then there are, you know,
Right.
different standards of beer. And to be honest, it's not just India. You can find this in Vietnam. You can find this in, you know,
Everywhere.
Thailand, and you can find it even in the US with some of the newer breweries. There are 20,000 breweries. Unfortunately, the percentage in India is very higher of,
Across the US.
yeah, across the US, there are
Mm-hmm.
20,000 plus breweries.
Okay, so speaking about the market, the market in India, I would assume is fairly fragmented. People drink beer, but an even smaller fraction of those people drink craft beer.
Yeah.
And then there are people who are drinking cocktails, homegrown spirits. All of these things are sort of shining quite brightly in the drinks horizon of India.
Yeah.
So has the fact that you've built a community helped you stand out in any way um, from everything else that's going on?
Definitely. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like having that community has been sort of like an anchor that, no matter what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
new breweries, craft cocktails just sort of took over, especially post pandemic, all over. Like every bar now has a fancy cocktail program with clarified cocktails and chopping their own ice. And it just came out of nowhere and it's just sort of
Yeah,
everywhere now. But yeah, having that community
yeah.
definitely has been like an anchor where, that community still likes craft beer. They still show up. They still drink beer. Even though, there
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of commonality between the craft beer community and the cocktail community, but they have not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily gone off beer. Yeah. And
Right, right.
there have been consequences for craft breweries for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And what plans do you have to sort of grow this community further? Like, what would you say the success scenario looks like for Great State and community building?
Just like that example I gave you of the founders of Dogfish and Sierra Nevada as
Hmm.
old, maybe 40, 50-year-olds, 30 years into their craft beer journey, still being there talking to people, right? Like one thing is clear that we have to do innovative, active engagement with the audience. We have to do it constantly and continuously. And that is the basic rule of this playbook. We've done that now. We launched in
Hmm.
Goa a couple of years ago. We did exactly that. We've launched in Taiwan as of December last year. And we are trying to do exactly that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I think need to continue doing that. Need to put enough resources. The more markets we are in, the more competitive it gets with so many other options that the consumer has. It makes even more sense to do this even more now because it's those 15 people events that are more critical than these 2,000 people beer fests where it's all just lost. So success would be
Hmm.
to build continue building that community. I don't expect that community to be as loyal and in love with the brand as the first few early adopters. But at Great State, we have always
Hmm.
tried to push craft beer as a category, not Great State as a brand. So success for Great State is actually a bit dependent on more breweries like ours coming into the market and doing their little bit and overall brewing increasing that community because one small brewery with limited resources just cannot make a big impact.
Cool. So, Nakul, for anyone who is listening who may be thinking about getting into the craft brew industry, could you tell me a little bit about, like, give me some data, like how big is the craft brew market? How long does it take to break even? What does initial investment look like?
It's a tough
Mm,
one. The beer market is huge right now. Craft beer market in India is
sure.
less than a percent in terms of volume. That this goes to say that it's a big market, no doubt. That there is enough and more people who are yet to taste
Mm,
craft and adapt to craft. So I don't think a person should
hmm.
be necessarily worried about the size of the market. Different states in India have different alcohol rules. So some are better to be a craft beer brand like a Maharashtra, where there are enough drinkers and the laws are such that you can build a craft beer brand. You take a Karnataka, for example, it's a very brew pub based model. So it's a little more challenging. If you want to be a bigger brewery, you need to set up a big brewery, a lot of investment. Looking at key markets and rules and regulations in the markets is critical. I was lucky that I'm from Maharashtra, so it happened to have the best policy or one of the best policies,
Sure.
but might not be the case for everyone. Um, Investment wise, it's really very subjective. What is the
Sure.
scale that you think you will sell? Right. One really good piece of advice I got from my visits in the US, brewer visits, because they're bootstrapped and kitchen to garage, garage to brewery. They said that think of year three, year
Hmm.
five sales when you're setting up production, not the next month. Because scaling an existing operation is not easy. So you need to, the setup needs to
Right.
happen in a way that it's scalable. And yeah, so investment is subjective. In a Maharashtra, if you manufacture equipment locally for which you need enough knowledge and understanding of the brewing process. If you don't, then you're better off getting a reliable manufacturer. But if you know your product, if you know how to brew beer, if you understand the science behind it, you can build a pretty decent sized brewery, which will be sufficient for your first 3 years of as a small business because this takes time to grow in under 1.5 CR. So investment in Maharashtra can be on the lower end. In terms of time for break even, again depends on your business model. A brew pub and taproom model is quicker, possibly to break even because you're in the retail space, you're selling to customers, you're running a bar. Obviously, that comes with a whole bunch of challenges, but it's quicker. Distribution, like what Great State does, is longer. We are keeping the fact that this is craft beer, keeping the fact that it's a fun product aside. We are
Right.
essentially a manufacturing setup. we have a whole bunch of capital investment to do in the beginning. Then you need to grow to a certain scale in terms of how much you're selling to start breaking even. With our laws, with difficulty of craft beer, with the costs involved, seeing how cheap commercial beer is, how many offers they're giving, all these things put together, it's anywhere from 3 to 5 years to reach a certain scale to kind of start breaking even on a monthly basis. So need to
Those deep
have that,
pockets to survive
you know, uh,
3 to 5
uh,
years.
yeah. Deep pockets, or just not necessarily. We didn't have deep pockets, but we survived by doing some
Mhm.
uh, unique things. In the beginning, we were contract brewing beer, for example, for another brand, which kept our lights open on, and we could
Right.
build great state slowly. So there are different ways to do this, but the point is that one should know that it will take 3 to 5 years to start patting yourself on the
Mhm.
back or start feeling good about your business.
Mhm.
There's no escape around it if you don't
Right.
open your own
Okay.
tap room.
Um, so, so thank you, Nakul. This has been a fun chat. I want to move to the rapid fire section of our conversation. It's just like a fun, quick answers. First thing that comes to your head. Don't think too much about it. Are you ready?
Okay, I mean, yeah, I suck at these. I'm sure a lot of people say that, but okay, let's see if I can be funny here
If you can be funny
or
on demand.
controversial.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Or controversial.
Okay,
Define craft beer.
fresh, local, and unique.
Okay. One thing people don't know about craft beer but should know.
Hmm. Mm, Freshness. Any great state beer you drink is not more than a month old in a bar. And you take a Kingfisher bottle or a Budweiser bottle, just check the manufacturing date. It's just the nature of our,
Of the business. Okay.
yeah.
What's the first thing that comes to your head when I say great state?
Uh, Craft, uh, subculture, yeah.
Okay. Um, what was the first beer you ever had?
Kingfisher.
Okay. A pet peeve you have about the way people drink beer? Is there something like you see them doing this while drinking their beer, you're like totally
Chugging
judging
beer,
them.
chugging beer. Yeah. And unless they're chugging, Kingfisher, it's fine. But
Great
chugging
state.
craft beer is like it's like a waste. And I
No?
suck at chugging anyways. So
Mm.
it's supposed to be appreciated and not like wine, but there is so much more to it than trying to get drunk and yeah.
Fair enough. Something no one told you when you were starting out.
That yeah, my passion for brewing beer and for this space does not translates to being good as a manager or a operator of a business. It's not the same thing. Yeah,
Okay, and one piece of advice you'd give someone who is starting out in the craft brew industry.
I think there are better ways to burn your money, is what I would say, because it's not easy to keep it together and do this if you want to do it the right way. Yeah,
Mhm.
and I think anyone starting, I would say, first become a good home brewer before you even think of starting a business, because that is just helps so much in the long run. Today I have moved to Goa. I'm not in Pune where my brewery is, but I can monitor because I know brewing and I can keep track of things. If I didn't know the technical aspect of brewing, I would be lost and just won't be as easy to keep that quality going.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nakul. This has been a really fun conversation. I had a lot of fun. I'm hoping you had fun as well.
Yeah, I think only thing we've missed is maybe a pint of Great State as we were talking about beer.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, thank you so much. This has been a really fun conversation.
same here. Thanks for having me.
Like, share, and subscribe to the Big Food Energy podcast for more inspirational and important stories from the world of food.